Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live Ranorex webinar on working from home with Ranorex. Happy Friday, and my name is Jason Branham. I'll briefly go through some slides here as we get set up. If you don't mind, let's wait a few moments for anyone straggling here to join up. In the meantime, though, if I could please confirm from you that you're able to see the slideshow on your screen and also able to hear my voice clearly. Looks like I already got some feedback there. Thank you guys so much. And as mentioned, let's give it a good 30 seconds for some people to file in here, and then we'll get officially started. All right, very good. Looks like people are definitely starting to roll in now. So with that, I'll start with some introductory slides here, so we still have a few more moments for them to come in. But let me formally introduce myself. As mentioned, my name is Jason Branham. Even share my webcam here so you guys can put a face to the voice. So welcome everybody, and yes, I've been a senior Ranorex engineer. I've been with the company about 6.5 years. You may recognize me from your evaluation phase of Ranorex or even as a support engineer. I already recognize some names in the audience there, people I've worked with even as recently as this week. So welcome everybody, and happy to present for you today. As we go through this, we're going to get right into the live demo here shortly, but please be aware that there is a questions panel of GoToWebinar, the one you already used to provide me some feedback on audio. And anytime you have a question, please feel free to jump in there and ask away. I see at least one user says they're not able to hear me. Please check your audio configuration in that case. It looks like most people are able to hear me though. So yeah, it looks like you guys are using that questions panel very well. I have two of my colleagues in the audience as well, Mubin and Josh, both engineers who can help out with any questions you have along the way. And we'll have plenty of time as well at the end for questions and answers. So yeah, lots of people rolled in here now. What I would like to do before we get started, I introduced myself, but to get my finger on the pulse of who's in the audience, I have a couple of quick questions for you I'd like you to answer for me. So if you don't mind just clicking these answers as they pop up on your screen, I'd like to know, what is your experience with Ranorex Studio? I'll wait until get a couple of responses there. All right, good. It's good mix. Some senior people in here as well as newcomers. Very good. We're almost at 66% voted. I'll wait just a few more seconds to get everyone a chance there. All right, we're about 3/4, so that's good enough for me. It looks like a pretty solid mix. If I can share these real quick. All right, it looks like a good percentage are brand new to Ranorex, but there's also a good percentage who've been using the tool for more than 2 years. So perfect. This is somewhat of a beginner webinar, but as I'll mention later, it's important stuff even if you've had the tool for quite a while. So one more quick question, if you don't mind, and that is just to get an idea of what your role in your organization is. What kind of tester are you? Or maybe you're not a tester, maybe you're a manager, for example. So one last poll here. Please just click the answer that applies. This will help us, cater our content going forward for the right audiences. All right, almost at 3/4 here. Looks like the majority of you are TAEs or test automation engineers. I guess some of you aren't able to select some. You should just be able to click that blue dialog. Hopefully it works for everybody. But it's tech, so sometimes things don't work exactly the way they should, right? We are at 3/4 coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll for now. But thank you guys very much for responding to that. Let me share the results real quick. As mentioned, it looks like most of you are test automation engineers, but a couple of managers in here as well. That's good. We have some content today for the managers as well, and some testers and developers there. So a nice good mix there. I appreciate, again, the answers. Let's get right into the content here then, shall we? So I will start with our agenda for today, just to introduce the webinar. It is going to be kind of a high level beginner type webinar. We're not going to go too deep into the technical stuff. I'm going to relate everything back to working from home. So we'll talk about things like the licensing architecture and integrations, but again, we'll keep it at a pretty high level. All these different topics I'm going to go into, of course, have their own dedicated webinars, which go a lot deeper. So I'll make sure to point those out near the end where you can find those if you want to learn more about anything I talk about today. And that brings us right into the live demo. What are we going to be learning today? Let's start there first, though. So we're going to start off with talking about the infrastructure of Ranorex, namely around licensing. As you know, a lot of you working from home these days, and we did see a little bit of pain there from some of the users of Ranorex, where maybe they forgot really how their licensing works. That's pretty common. You set something up and you don't really think about it until a situation like COVID happens, and then suddenly it's very important. So I want to quickly just go through how that licensing infrastructure works. A tangential topic to that will be what are the types of licenses we have. So just maybe a reminder for most of you, but especially for the newcomers as well, will be some good content there. We'll then talk about how you can keep an eye on your test creation using a source control tool. So is source control required? Absolutely not. But I'll talk about when it comes to work from home situation, how source control really helps you keep an eye on your project history and collaboration and things like that. And for more of the manager side of the house, we'll talk about utilizing integrations with a test management tool or a bug tracking tool. The examples I'll use will be TestRail and JIRA, and show you how that allows your managers and even the rest of the team to keep an eye on how your test results are coming in, right? How healthy your tests are. Lastly, just go over the procedure for submitting a support ticket. Again, we noticed with the work from home situation kind of being forced on us all, there were a lot of people who needed some help with the licensing. So to formally introduce that process to you and how you can get help from the support team right away, I'll just end with that, basically. And as mentioned, a tangential topic for the first one here will be a brief overview on the different license types that we offer, because it is important when talking about the licensing infrastructure. And that's where we'll start, actually. We will talk about the infrastructure. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I don't want to, distract anyone with my handsome COVID haircut and beard here. So let me turn off screen sharing or webcam sharing, and we're going to have a lot of stuff going on here. So let's talk about the Ranorex architecture. This is very important for licensing. So one of the first things I want to bring up is what are the different license types? So if you'll bear with me a moment, let me pull up our pricing page, just because that shows you the types right there in one place. So as you can see here, we really have two types of licenses, one for creating your test and then another for running your test. When it comes to creation, we call these premium licenses or studio licenses here on this page. You have two main types, which are node locked and floating. They both act quite differently as far as when it comes to migrating that license, for example. But however, functionally, they're the same, right? This is how you create your test and even run your test with these two types. So where does the different license types, where do they fit into exactly the infrastructure of Ranorex? I have a little diagram here. And for the purposes of simplicity, all we really need to worry about is the design time for now. So just to make this even easier to look at, I'm going to cut out a little chunk here. That's not important right now. This is when it comes to distributed tests. And all we really want to look at here is how we install Ranorex firstly. Right, so as you know, it's just a client install. So you just download from our website and install it locally on your machine. Okay, this allows you to create your test and even run your test. Now, when you're using the trial, you will have what's called a node lock license. Right, and node locked means that it is tied to a particular machine, a particular PC. So when it comes to working from home, let's say you had a machine at your office and that was using the trial license, that's tied to the machine. So unless you can bring that machine home with you, you're going to need to set up another environment, right? You're going to need to create another machine and get another license. So node locked is very limited, right? It's very locked down, as the name implies. Now the other type, right, were those floating types. We call them floating licenses, and those are going to live on what's called a license manager tool. So down here you see that license manager. What is the license manager? Well, it's a separate program that you install, and it's just another client install. I'll open it up here for you. Okay, you kind of have two standalone programs that you'll use for licensing. One is the Ranorex licensing app, and that's how I connect to a license. But the license manager is where, when it comes to these floating types, where I'll store my licenses. So let me just quickly open it here. And as you can see, any machine can be your license manager, right? Any PC. Obviously, Windows-based machine can be it. So it doesn't have to be a server operating system or anything like that. It could just be a standard Windows PC, Windows operating system. And when you buy a Ranorex license, right, you'll get a key. And when you come here into the license manager, you just basically paste that key and it will create a node up here. So as you can see, for example, I have a premium key installed, which is free right now, nobody's using it. And I also have those runtimes, right? Those are just for executing. I have 3 of those. So that's an important note as well, that your keys, you might have multiple keys on one number, right? One license key, but multiple instances. In this case, it's just the one premium though. Otherwise, we'd see a ratio there. And so this is how you install your licenses. And a lot of people forget about this. As mentioned, you set it up one time, you go to work for months or years, and time comes to work from home, and suddenly maybe this connection is not there anymore, right? How this communicates with your development environment is through port 7266. So that's an important number there, 726 and 6. So basically, if this license manager is sitting at your office and you're working from home, but you're not VPN'd or you're not on the network that you need to be on in order to communicate with this machine over that port specifically, so maybe even a firewall is blocking that port, for example, then you won't be able to lease your licenses. Okay, so that's probably the #1 reason we saw customers who had to move to home suddenly could not get a hold of their licenses anymore. It's either due to not being on the proper network, not VPN'd, or possibly a firewall blocking this port 7266. So to give you a quick real-time example of this, I have a remote machine here, right? Just pretend this is my colleague's machine off on the right side here. And as mentioned, right, the license manager is one part. Again, think of this as like the server, if you will, and the licensing tool, Ranorex licensing, is going to be your client in that example. So if I close the license manager for a second here, right, even on my machine, I have Ranorex licensing. Again, this is kind of the client side of the house, if you will. Looks exactly the same. Now notice I'm set up for a node lock key, so it's tied to my machine. So there you have the radio button node lock selected. And installing those is somewhat similar to license manager installation. You just paste the key in here. But again, that is tied to my machine only. Whereas my colleague here is using the floating option. So they are using the license manager hosted by my machine, actually. So this is my machine name, RX Laptop 120. And if I open Ranorex, let me open the license manager up one more time. If I open Ranorex on my colleague's machine here, you'll see that license get leased out. Okay, so let's watch it happen here. I launch Ranorex Studio on my colleague's machine, and suddenly you see that premium license right is leased. Okay, now I only had the one, so if another colleague tries to open Ranorex Studio on their machine and they're also pointed to my license manager here, right, they will not be able to open it. It's going to say no suitable license found. So this is kind of on a first come, first serve basis. If I close Ranorex Studio or shut down my machine or go to hibernate or sleep or any of that, right, if I basically stop doing Ranorex stuff, it takes a few seconds here, but that license will come back online for someone else to use. There we go, see it free. Okay, so again, the networking side of the house, if I want to just quickly open up a command prompt here on this machine, I just want to be able to make sure, right, that I can ping whatever PC it is that's holding my license manager. So if you go into command line, right, you have the command here, ping, and you can just put in your host name or IP address. And remember, I'm laptop 120. There we go. We see that we are communicating together. Now, if you don't get that, right, if you don't get that communication, then you certainly will not be able to lease that license. Now, on this side of the house, right, this is hosting the license manager. So let me open up a command prompt here and just show you, again, that license manager is communicating over port 7266. So you can do a netstat command with the AN argument there and find string 7266. Right, this shows me that my license manager is waiting, it's listening. And if you don't have any kind of listening here, then basically your license manager is not working correctly. And so those are kind of the two components networking wise. Again, as long as the machine that wants to use the license is able to ping the machine that is hosting the license, you should have no issue there. You should actually be able to come into this licensing tool and simply hit refresh here, and it should be auto-discovered, right? It should be one of these options we have. So hopefully that gives you a general idea of the licensing infrastructure and the two different types we have. Again, node locked, not so great in a work from home situation, but the floating licenses are very flexible. Oftentimes I describe the floating license and the license manager as a library. Basically think of the license manager as your library and think of those licenses as your library books. You can check one out, nobody else can use it until it gets checked back in. All right, very good. Hopefully that gives you a general idea. I don't see any questions in QA, but my colleagues are staying on top of them. So if you have questions, do please ask. Now that's just part of the infrastructure discussion here. Let's clean things up a bit and go back to our dialogue here, our diagram. Some other things that are important here, we'll talk about next, are using a version control system, a source control system. Now, this is incredibly important if you want to eventually get to continuous integration, right? Use a tool like Jenkins or TeamCity or Azure DevOps. But even without that, right? Even without planning to use CI/CD, version control is very, very good for other reasons as well, which I'd like to go into now. So let me bring up my slides again real quick here. All right, so we just learned about the installation and licensing infrastructure of Ranorex. Tangential to that was a quick overview of the different types of licenses. And now we'll get into keeping an eye on test development with source control. So I got a little meme here to keep it lighthearted for you. Source control, again, is important for your CI/CD processes, but even if you don't plan to do that, it's a very, very good tool to use just for general collaboration and keeping a running project history. Right? Is it possible to work in a team together without using source control? Yes, it is. But source control gives you so many advantages, which I'm going to quickly go through, that make it very, very useful for working a team, especially when the team is remotely distributed, right? It keeps those lines of communication, keeps a nice dashboard to show who's doing what for the whole team to look at. So again, we're not going to go too deep into this. We're going to keep it pretty high level, but in Ranorex, you do have the option to use multiple source control tools. Let me go ahead and open up a very simple Ranorex project here. So what we have in this project is a test suite called Working from Home Automated Tests with 2 test cases, an add 1 user, and an empty table by default. If any of you are in the evaluation phase and have been through a demo with me, you probably recognize this the scaffolding here. If I want to add my test into source control, first I need a source control tool, right? So the 3 that we support are Git, Subversion, and TFS. I'm going to go with Git. I think it's probably the most popular at the moment anyway, but this, these procedures are going to be the same across each tool with small minor changes in basically vocabulary. So I'm going to use my personal GitHub account here, and I'm going to create a new source control repository, which I will just call Working from Home Repo. Let's create that real quick. So for those of you who are not familiar at all with source control, basically you could treat this like a Dropbox, right? It's a place where you can upload your work and download your work. That's a very simplified way of putting it, but that's a good way to think about it for those who have not really had a handle on it yet. So when it comes to that, I've created this folder, basically this Dropbox, if you will, this repo, and I need to have this address that it gives me. This is basically going to point, allow me to point my project to this particular repository, this repo, so that when I do my uploading and downloading, that works correctly. So let me quickly copy this address here. I'll need that for Ranorex. And back in your Ranorex environment, to add a solution to source control, you're going to come up to the Project Explorer here in the top left and right click. And at the bottom of this menu you'll see an option called source control. So first things first, we want to add our solution to source control. As mentioned here, the 3 flavors, right? I'm using GitHub, which is Git based. There's lots of different names though, right? You have Bitbucket, GitLab. There's just so many out there. Most of them nowadays are Git based, but again, we also support Subversion and TFS. I'm going to stick with Git, obviously, and hit select here. Now, one thing it will have you download as kind of extra is this program called Tortoise Git. It's basically just a free open source Git client. That way you're not needing to use the command line. You actually have a UI to work with. So it will prompt you at this point, if you don't have it already, to download Tortoise Git. And the other setting it wants us to look at is what kind of merge tool we want to use. Now there is a custom merge tool in Ranorex called the Magic Merger. You absolutely want to go with that, yes. So I won't go too deep into why, but again, just trust me. You want to say yes here and use our customized merge tool as opposed to the default one. So get those set up and hit save and proceed. All right, now your solution is staged. It's kind of hard to see maybe on the dark theme here, but all of my icons here have a little plus symbol next to them, a little blue plus symbol, basically meaning they're ready to be uploaded. They're ready to be pushed is the word we use in Git, and committed. So commit is like a save. If I right click on the solution now, I see all these different source control activities down here. Again, push is like an upload, pull is like a download, commit is like a save. And that's a very basic way of describing these, but hopefully will make the most sense to everybody. So first things first, before I upload, right, I need to commit or save. So let's do a commit here first. And the typical message you give on your first commit is just that, initial commit. Notice all these different files that make up my Ranorex solution are selected here. So let's go through with that and hit commit. By the way, this UI is just TortoiseKit, so that's why you see the little turtle there. Okay, now I'm going to push. So I'm going to upload my work. Now, a first time setup here is I got to tell it where to upload, right? I got to tell it where to push. So I need to set up a destination. You'll want to come to this manage part here of TortoiseKit and just paste in that repository URL that we copied from GitHub earlier. All right, that's a one-time setup. From that point forward, I'll just be able to pick that so-called origin. That's the name of it. So I got that set up. I'll click OK. Make sure it's selected here. That's the only one I have, so looks good. And then we'll click OK to actually push. Now I have this set up so that I do need to have credentials in order to push from another tool like this. So I'm going to put in my GitHub credentials now. All right, so it says success. We've pushed. And now all those blue plus symbols we saw before are green check marks, basically indicating that what I have here locally on my machine is one-to-one with what we see in GitHub. And if we go back to GitHub, we'll actually be able to verify that. So now if I go back to my same address there and I refresh, there's my project. Okay, so that's just getting everything into source control. Now, what is the benefit of distributed teamwork? Right? If we're all working from home, we want to be able to see what everyone else is doing. Right? Now, you can communicate that directly, obviously, over Slack or Skype or whatever. But again, GitHub or any version control system for that matter is going to not only show us who does what, but also give us a running history, a backup even of our project as it goes along. So a quick, simple example of this would be, okay, I'm gonna come in day 2 now, and I'm going to change one of these test cases, right? Let's change our module here where we do some validation. I'll hop into that. I'm gonna change my expected value just as an example. And as soon as I make a change locally and save it, all right, you're gonna notice on my project view here that it shows a little red exclamation point next to that module, right? I'm working in the validate one user added module. And this is telling me, hey, my local version is not the same as my version in GitHub, which makes sense, right? We haven't pushed our changes yet. And so, again, I'll go through the process of committing and pushing to kind of upload my work. So that's a right click on the solution, commit. Now at this point, I don't want to just give a generic message. I want to talk about exactly what I did. And as you can see down here, what's been modified is that validate one user added module. So here is how you keep a running history, right? I updated the validate one user module. Now, the more descriptive your commit messages are, the better. There's a little joke running out there, right, about as the project goes on, my commit messages get less and less descriptive, but it's important, right? It's important that people can tell what's been modified, but the more descriptive you can be here, the better. So that's probably not too descriptive, but nonetheless, it's enough for this example. I updated the validate one user module, and we're going to go commit that and then push. So again, I just have to give my credentials. Now I'm the same user, right? But this could be another user logging in with their account, and GitHub will tell me, right, who uploads what, who pushes what. So let's close after that change. And if I go back to my, notice first that my red check mark, my red exclamation point went back to a green check mark now because we're one-to-one. And if I go back to GitHub and refresh real quick, we'll see that there's been 2 commits. Right, and again, you get your commit message right next to basically what has changed. So we see when it happened, who did it, all that good information. Again, this is very high level at the moment. There is a webinar just on source control. For the sake of time, we'll have to move on. But as you can see there, right, we get a running history of commits or what's been changed and by who. And that is really the key, so that the team knows, again, who's doing what and why. So let's leave it at that for now. Again, check out the other webinar if you're interested in more about how to use source control in Ranorex. I will point those out at the end of the webinar today. But let's move on to our next topic, which is more for the managers in the audience. So we just talked about the end users, right? The testers using a source control tool to collaborate very well together. When it comes to the management side of the house, they just want to see, okay, when you're running your test, what's happening? Are they passing? Are they failing? They want to get a high-level overview, right, of what our testing is actually doing. So let's talk about using either a test management tool or a bug tracking tool in order to give our managers that high-level dashboard, look. So as mentioned, we'll talk about our integration with both TestRail and JIRA. Again, these will be very quick, very high level for the sake of time, but we do also have webinars on each of these individual integrations. So we'll jump right in here to Ranorex. Very, very easy and quick integration to do here. I'm back in my project that we pushed into Git. And of course, I can run my test locally. I get a report, but that's reports only for me, unless I email it to somebody or maybe set up automatic emailing, which we do offer. But again, that's just a one instance report. We want to see more of a dashboard. What are all the tests doing? What does the high level picture of our testing look like? And so let's start with an integration into JIRA. This is more so when things go wrong, right? It's a bug tracking tool. And if something goes wrong, then we have an integration which will create a bug or issue rather in JIRA completely for you here. So let's start there, and I need to get my JIRA environment up and going here. Now, just to show you that there's no tricks I'm pulling on you, we are going to create a brand new JIRA project from scratch here. So I'm in my JIRA environment. I'll go to create project. We'll just go with the classic. Why not? I'll give it a name. We'll call it the working from home project. Key WP. All right, so we have a brand new, completely from scratch project. Nothing special going on here. No settings need to be changed or anything like that. Let's get back into Ranorex here. And when you want to integrate into your JIRA environment, you're going to come up here to the tools menu of your project. It's exactly the same for TestRail as well, as we'll see here in a moment. But you have this JIRA integration flyout, and it's all wizard driven. So I'm going to start the JIRA wizard. And one thing you'll want to do is sign in as a valid JIRA account, obviously. I recommend actually creating a JIRA user just for Ranorex. Maybe call it the Ranorex user. As the bugs that are submitted, the issues that are submitted, will be submitted by whatever user you're logged in as here. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's a good recommendation to kind of create a user just for your Ranorex test, just for your Ranorex submissions, if you will. So go ahead and log in as that account. Now that will require you to set up a API key, which is very, very well documented in JIRA. Just search on Google for how I create a JIRA API key, and it'll be the first result you get there. That's the only other thing you need to do at that sign-in stage. Once you're signed in, any projects that user has access to will appear in the drop-down. So that one I just created there, right, is now appearing in this drop-down. Work from home project. So we select our project and then we hit next, or continue rather. And then you have two options. You have manual issue handling and automatic issue handling. Manual is just basically giving you a suggestion. So when something goes wrong, when something fails, it'll say, hey, this test case failed. Do you want to create an issue? If so, click this little link. So a little link will appear in your report to help you set up that issue. Not quite as impressive, in my opinion, as the automatic issue handling, but it's pretty nice if you're just getting started, right? You want to make sure that your automations are working correctly. You don't want your automation to be creating a bunch of bugs unnecessarily, right? Maybe they're false failures, for example. So it's a good place to start anyway. You can turn these off and on at will. So for now, I won't turn on the manual. I'll just go straight for the automatic and enable automatic issue handling. I have to pick a few things here, right? What type of issue am I going to create when something goes wrong? Well, let's just go straight for creating a bug here, for example. What state should that issue be in? Backlog sounds good to me. And here's the coolest thing about the automatic issue handling. If a test case fails, it's going to create a bug. If that same test case is run again and it passes, it's going to clear that bug and set it to the done state, which is pretty nice. So we'll hit finish here. Once you finish configuring this initial stuff, there's a lot more we can go into, as you can see here. For example, I'm able to fill in all kinds of different fields. You know, who's reporting it, Ranorex, let's say. There's a couple of good features here as well that I like to take a look at, which is the upload video. If you guys are aware, one of the newer features, well, it's not so new anymore maybe, but we do have the ability to create videos of your test run. I think that's a great thing to attach to your JIRA issue. So it gives our developers a nice look into exactly what happened when something went wrong. And again, notice that I can fill out as many fields as I want here. I can switch on and off, either manual or automatic. Again, I'm going to stick with the automatic for now. These are just the basic fields that we see most people have. As you know, JIRA is very configurable. So we do also offer the ability to edit this manually. Now you need to know a little bit of JSON syntax for that to work. But you can create your own custom fields here that get set as well. We're going to keep everything pretty bare bones though, again, for the sake of time. And I'm just going to make sure that I have automatic issue handling turned on. And I want that upload video. Now, one thing about the upload video option here, if you check that box, you do still need to turn on that property. And that's back at my test suite here. So it's kind of hidden. I like to point it out at this point. The test suite, if I right click, has some properties available that I can set. This is where you'll find any of your reporting stuff actually. So there's a report tab on the very right there. I could change where my report gets generated, you know, what the name and extension is, all kinds of stuff. Again, we're going to stick for the basics here and go straight to my video reporting option at the very bottom there. And if something fails, you can do it for all test cases, but I just want to do it for failed test cases only. Basically, if one of my test cases here runs and has an issue, I'm going to create a video about it. And with the JIRA integration, not only will that video be locally available to me, but also uploaded with the issue submission. So obviously, for this to work, we do need a failure. And I do have one. I just changed that expected value, which is going to end up resulting in a failure for this test case. Before I run the test, just know that I can always come back to Tools, JIRA Integration, and now go to Configure to change any of those fields or settings that we had set earlier, okay? Let's give it a run here. I'm just going to run it locally. And when the test case fails, we will get a JIRA issue created for us. See some good questions rolling in here about some people still using MTM. We have some good blogs on that, by the way. We can get it over to you. Here's my quick little test run. It's a very quick test. Again, those of you who are evaluating right now and have been in a demo with me, you're probably pretty familiar with the workflow here. Oh, I see the question. Will these settings also be put into Git? Yes, absolutely. Your settings file, it creates actually an additional file called JIRA.jsd. I'll quickly show that when we get back in here. But yes, no matter where this test runs now, those settings will follow. All right, so our second test case was okay, but our first one was not. We failed. In my report, again, I get a video to play locally because of that setting I changed. But more impressive, I think, is that, well, there's our failure real quick, right? We only added one user, but my validation expected 9,999. We obviously failed that. Oh, and my integration got a 400, beautiful. let me quickly configure it for the other project, which I know works. I know I kind of did that off the fly there. Lovely. So let me remove or point it to my other project here, just to get it going here. Okay, good. Yeah, it's going to remove that reporter. I had a feeling that I set something up a little differently that time. We'll keep the rest of the stuff good. So I'm just pointing to a different project now, guys, just so you know. Give it one more run so we don't get our 400 there. Apparently, I need to look at my JIRA environment. It must have changed something on me. And then we'll talk about TestRail, which is similar, but whereas JIRA is more centered around things going wrong, right? It's a bug tracking tool. It can be a test management tool as well, but we strictly integrate with the bug tracking side of things. TestRail, on the other hand, is a full-blown test management tool, and it will show us, both the good and the bad. Yeah, that time looks like we did get a good connection to JIRA, so apologies. When you go live, these things happen. All right, so it says down here, we created a new JIRA issue, add one user test case. If I click in my report, I'll be taken directly to that issue in my JIRA environment. And of course, you get the standard feedback, the stack trace of what happened. You get those tracing screenshots that we saw in the report, but you'll also get that uploaded video, which I think is really, really cool to kind of couple those two features together. So there's duration. Again, I left everything kind of bare bones, so the fields are pretty unimpressive to look at right now, but we could see in our steps here what failed. We even got a screenshot of when it failed. And more importantly, or more cool, I think, is the attachments down here to this issue contain a video. All right, so your developers can't say, hey, it worked on my machine. You have video proof now. And there we go. So real quick, if I correct that issue, right, and run it again. So let me quickly fix my validation expected value. In that case, we didn't really find a bug, right? We just had a problem with our test, which again is probably why you want to start with the manual issue creation over the automatic. You don't want to be creating false failures, false issues. And I'm noticing the time, we're a little bit behind, probably due to that failure there that we had with the 400. So I'll try to speed things up a bit. I want to get to the Q&A. A lot of good questions are coming in, and thanks to Josh and Mubin for staying on top of those. All right, so this time around it passed. We should automatically clear our issue. Again, we have a full webinar on this integration, so let's leave it at that and talk next about my TestRail integration. As you can see though, after passing, we close the existing issue that we had created earlier. Very good. So TestRail is very similar. Real quick, just for those of you who maybe aren't TestRail customers, let me give you a quick insight into the environment there. Again, TestRail is nice because from a manager perspective, it gives me a very good look at all my projects and specifically my test, how they're doing. All right, so I get this dashboard and I see what test failed, what test passed, what needed to be retest. Right at the moment, these are all just manual test runs I have set up in TestRail. You can do both, right? You can integrate your automated test, but you can also just run manual test runs as well. Again, there's a whole webinar on this, so I'll kind of leave it there and get to the integration side. Now, to integrate with TestRail is very similar to JIRA. It's through tools. It's a wizard again here. So start the TestRail wizard. There's a couple things, a couple settings you will need to change on the TestRail side, which is activate the enable API. That's just going to be in your administration tab here. You will see a section for API under site settings. There's the API section, and you want to make sure that's checked. Make sure your user that you're signing in has the appropriate permissions. Basically, they have the permissions to do a test run and things like that. And there's a lot more to it, but not too much of a setup, really. We'll hit continue, sign in as our account, just like JIRA. Now, it's a two-way street. You can either export your automated tests that you maybe created already into TestRail, or you could even pull down those manual tests and import those into Ranorex Studio to automate. So it is a two-way communication between TestRail and Ranorex, but for the sake of time, I'll just simply export what I've created here into my existing TestRail project real quick. Again, if we look back at that project, I do not have any other test suites, right? And TestRail uses very much the same vocabulary as Ranorex does. You can have test suites with test cases. And here we have the manual test suite with 2 test cases in there. But that's all we have currently. That's going to change once I integrate Ranorex and export what I've done here. Right, it's going to create a new test suite in TestRail called Automated Test, and it's going to include these 2 test cases in that. Let's export and continue. And you just go for the export all. Maybe you have multiple test suites, for example. I just have the one, so all, and selecting just the one there is the same thing. Now, I'm not going to go to a new TestRail project. I'm glad I caught myself there before I hit continue. I'm going to connect to that working from home project I have set up already, and then export. All right, so it says 2 test cases were created. Add one user, an empty table by default. Again, just going based on the names that I provided in Ranorex. Cool thing is I now have a direct link to these as well. So if I want to visit them in the TestRail side, off to the right here, you'll see this little link, which I can very quickly jump to that specific test case. Right, and again, let's go back to kind of the main view, which is if I go to my test suites and cases again, there we go. Our new test suite has been created, the automated test, and we have our 2 test cases there. Now, more importantly, when you run a manual test in TestRail, right, you basically come to this test runs and you say, let's add a test run. Right, you're doing it manually. Whereas with Ranorex, you're going to run from Ranorex. However Ranorex runs, right? Maybe it's running from a CI tool. Maybe you're running it locally. Doesn't matter. No matter what option you have, you'll be able to run and report those results back to TestRail. So the easiest way locally here, I can just do it through the UI. I get this new button up here, a new run button. So think of it this way. This run button will run locally and return results locally. This run button will run locally, return results locally, but also add a test run to my TestRail project. That's the only difference between those 2 runs. Let's give it a click. Again, we pick our project. It is going to be a new test run, right? Or we could update an existing, but let's go with the new. And we can give it, you know, let's leave the default name there. That's fine. Now, I mentioned you can do this multiple different ways. We also see down here the command line version. So if I am using a CI tool, for example, and I'm not going to be going through the UI like I just did, I can copy paste these command line arguments to achieve that. But let's continue through the UI and hit run and report results. So luckily it's a quick test. Oh yeah, I see the question here. Integrate with TestRail and JIRA when working with the Ranorex API in Visual Studio. You definitely can. You'll probably want to open it up just once in Ranorex Studio so you can walk through that UI wizard-driven way of doing the integration. Once you have that set up though, right, both TestRail and JIRA, as we saw there, can be also configured via the command line. So you can make that connection via just the command line arguments of running your test. But the initial configuration, you're going to probably want to open it up in Ranorex Studio to do that, right? Would be my recommendation there. But yes, we do have customers who are doing that. I also see the question, if you're doing the PDF conversion of your report, will that get uploaded to JIRA? Yes, it will. So both your reports, whatever your artifacts may be, can be uploaded beyond just the standard report. And here's our final quick little test case, and we have some results now. Now, again, I get my results locally, of course. I'm also checking JIRA, right? We have both now. We have Ranorex talking to JIRA and TestRail. If I come back to my TestRail project, all right, we're starting to see more results come in. So you may have noticed we were at 6, now we're at 8 test runs for today. And if I want to go to the test runs section, there is my results automatically added to my history. So again, this is more for the the manager, the QA manager, or the test lead. Can basically keep a finger on the pulse of what our tests are doing, if they're passing, if they're failing. Very nice, again, when you're working from home, rather than having to email the test results and things like that. They can come in at any time here and check this out and get a good feel for what's going on, right? So these two platforms are excellent advantages or additions, rather, to your Ranorex project in order to, again, work from home and collaborate in a better way. So definitely leverage those integrations. And as mentioned, they are also have full-blown webinars on each individual environment there. So I will point those out. Obviously, for time's sake, we had to keep it pretty high level for today. But you can see the importance, I hope, of the the working from home aspects of those two platforms. Last but not least is just a quick one about how you'll go about getting help if you need support. Again, we saw a lot of people who had to go to work from home, and maybe they had node lock licenses, or maybe they didn't have access to their license manager, and so their licensing was kind of shut down for a moment. Support is very, very quick to hop on those issues, right? If it's a licensing issue, you're going to move to the top of the queue, whether it's whether you're an enterprise customer or just a standard support customer. We take the licensing issues very seriously and know we want to turn those around quickly. But besides that, of course, any technical issues you run into, use the support team as a force multiplier, right? It's like getting some additional engineers on your team for free. Well, not for free, but for subscription costs, which is definitely worth it, in my opinion. So when you are an existing customer, how do you go about getting quick support here? Basically, if you go to our website, there is a formal ticketing system there. So just go to ranorex.com. And on the website, you'll go to support, the top title bar here, and the help center. So it is kind of a little bit hidden here, so it's nice to walk you through it here. After support help center, you'll see this little graphic down here in the bottom right. Ranorex Studio Support, contact our support team via email. You just click this contact us, or alternatively, you can just remember this address here, ranorex.com/support-query. Now, we do ask that you authenticate yourself with either a license key, a support key, or manual authentication. All of these different keys you will get on that initial email when you purchase. So I do realize, right, that may be maybe have happened a long time ago. So maybe you don't remember what your license key is or your support key. In those cases, just reach out to anyone on the Ranorex team that you know. You can also reach out to sales@ranorex.com, or hey, even reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure to get you the appropriate key right away. So you do authenticate yourself with some of these, one of these bits of information, and just make sure when you fill out the details of the ticket, you just mention licensing, and it will again automatically escalate to the top of the queue, because obviously we don't want you to be without your license. So don't forget this ability to submit support tickets. Again, we saw quite a few people who ran into some infrastructure problems with the whole working from home thing. So I want to keep that very clear for everybody, that they can very quickly get a quick turnaround on those types of situations. Just don't forget that you can reach out to us, right? And with that, we are through with the content here. So quickly summarize what we learned. We talked a little bit about the licensing model and the infrastructure around that, particularly the license manager, how that kind of works. Remember port 7266, if you remember to keep that open and keep that communicating, then you shouldn't have any issues. Talk about using version control or source control so that the team, right, the end users can kind of keep an eye on who's doing what and collaborate more easily. More for the managers are these kind of reporting dashboards. You know, Ranorex doesn't supply you with a dashboard out of the box, so plugging into one of these environments is a good idea if you want to keep all those, your test health basically available for everyone to see. And lastly, how do you submit a support ticket? A quick one there. But definitely, again, if you run into licensing issues, you will move to the top, so reach out right away. And additionally, we kind of tangentially covered the different license types, right? Node locked and floating as it pertains to the licensing infrastructure. After this webinar, you will get a video to download this recording. We record the whole thing, and feel free to follow up and reply to that email that you'll get with any questions you may have that I can't cover today. Looks like my guys did a good job of keeping everyone covered, but I will open it up for Q&A. Maybe Josh Mabine, did you run into any good questions that you think would be good for the whole audience?
We did. A couple I saved here. One about using TFS and Git kind of simultaneously and mixing and matching. Of course, mixing and matching source control is not going to work. But if you have any comments on that one, Jay?
Sure, it technically could be doable, right? It could be feasible. Let me open this project real quick in Explorer here, and you see that when I set up for Git, I got this little Git folder. Now, if I want to also push this into TFS, I certainly can. And the easiest way, by the way, guys, we do have this in the source control menu here. It's a little different, but when you first add the source control, you'll see those options, right? Git, Subversion, TFS. The TFS option does require you to have an additional plugin, what we call the MSS CCI provider. And this thing is not exactly great, let's put it that way. It's a bit slow and a little bit buggy, honestly. Notice it doesn't have a stellar rating there, but that is how you can connect to TFS and still do your source control activity here in Ranorex Studio. What we find works a little bit easier than that, and it's probably what people are most used to, is to simply open their Ranorex project in Visual Studio, or they have what's called a standalone team explorer for Visual Studio. Some of you may know, right? We create a Ranorex solution, but we also create a standard Visual Studio solution. These are both the same thing. They're created in parallel, and a change in one will create the same change in the other. So keep that in mind, they're one-to-one. But if I open up the standard Visual Studio solution of my test, then I have quick access to the Team Explorer menu there, where I can check in, check out, right? So another difference between Git and TFS is the vocabulary. Git uses push and pull. TFS uses your check in, check out. Once you open the solution in Visual Studio, and apologies, my Visual Studio is quite slow to get booted usually. Got a lot of plugins. But you'll have this Team Explorer, right, where you can then, it's kind of the standard way that people have worked with. Now I see already a GitHub one, but if I'd like, I could connect here to my standard on-premise TFS server as well. And when I hear the word TFS, I always want to make sure that I differentiate that an on-premise TFS server is not the same thing as TFS in the cloud, right? What they call Azure DevOps. If you are using TFS in the cloud, like Azure DevOps here, that is actually a Git-based source control, right? What they call the Azure repos is Git-based. So in that case, even though, right, it may have a TFS address here, and you might think it's called TFS, it's actually Git-based. So in those cases, you will choose Git actually. Just so you know. And while we're here, a real quick kind of side topic is that a CI tool like Azure DevOps also gives you the ability to create test health dashboards and things like that, so you can keep an eye on your test runs. Again, this is one that we have a full-blown webinar for, but as you can see, pretty similar to JIRA and TestRail there. Great question though. Yes, you can mix and match theoretically. You can even have multiple repositories that you're checking in or pushing your code to. But yeah, usually it's best to pick one, I would say. Great question. Thanks, Josh.
One follow-up while you're kind of in this area is talking about tying test cases to MTM test cases. Is that possible?
Yes, so we do still work with MTM, I'll be honest. It is a bit kludgy. MTM is, as with most things in Microsoft, it wants very specific types of tests. So what you basically have to do, and if you just come to our blog here, if you just type Ranorex MTM, you'll find it. You basically have to create a wrapper around your Ranorex test, and it has to be a coded UI type of wrapper. So it follows through all the steps here. That is unfortunately due to MTM only recognizing coded UI as a viable test type. So it is a bit of legwork to get plugged into MTM, I'll be honest. You basically have to create that wrapper. Kind of silly that they're still going with that, considering coded UI is being deprecated and no longer supported here shortly. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not as seamless anyway as something like Azure DevOps or TestRail or JIRA, but it is doable. So check out that blog if you want some, at least a starting point. We can certainly help out as well. I'm just noticing the time, guys. I'm going to keep taking questions because they're great, but for those who have to go, I do want to just quickly thank you for your attention. I'll stop the recording here, but I'll stay on for a couple more minutes and see if there's any other good questions we can get to. So thanks, guys. Happy Friday and have a good weekend.
Great. Thank you, Jason. There is one question regarding JIRA. If you'd like to answer it, it is, can we create a JIRA report file from the test run and import it to JIRA later?